and welcome. This is another Confessions podcast from your friends at BBC Radio 2. Another audio array of terrible tales from the most sinful bunch of listeners this side of the Acapulco River. Wherever that is. OK, here comes this week's concise collection. It features a forgetful father's fable, an actor assault accident, a fumbling festival of folly, and we end with the very special waltzing wartime wonder featuring special guest Michael Morpurgo. Reverend Green sending in tonight's confession. Hello, Reverend Green. Thank you very much indeed. Dear Father Simon and the Caring Collective, as a man of the cloth, I should be seeking the forgiveness of a higher power, but I'm conscious of Matt's desire to provide absolution to ministers of religion who have committed grave sins.
Well, it tends to be if they're foul-mouthed vicars. That tends to always mean that you're forgiven.
He's not.
Oh, right. Never mind.
As far as I'm aware.
No, so it's not.
Anyway, hence, I beseech your forgiveness for a sin committed some years ago. I'm a minister of religion and I have 4 kids. My story dates back to the time when the children were young, the oldest, a boy, being 10, the youngest, also a boy, being an infant of about 1. Part of my role as a minister involves delivering Bible-based lectures in my home congregation and in neighbouring areas. Often these discourses centre on the demands and responsibilities involved in family life, including effective communication within the family and care for children. I'm emphasising this because clearly it is significant. As a father of 4, I had anecdotes coming out of my ears. Were there a clerical mastermind, this would be my specialist subject. Communication within the family and care for the children.
Okay.
On the occasion... Have I underlined that in red?
Yeah, I think we've got it now. Yeah.
Italics, underline. On the occasion in question, we had visited a neighbouring congregation where I was to deliver a talk of the kind described. We knew some members of this congregation personally, and as we visited regularly. When we arrived on the morning in question, one of our acquaintances, who also had a family with several small children, invited us back to his home for some refreshments following the morning worship. The discourse was duly delivered and a question and answer session developed, following which there was an opportunity for general discussion and fellowship. Then it was time to head off to our friend's home for refreshments. We piled into our car. They piled into theirs. It was common around this time for my wife and me to rotate responsibility for the children. Sometimes we would split 50-50, other times it would be along gender lines, depending on age, or one of us might have a night off and hand the whole brood over. On this occasion, as my wife was heavily involved in the creation and organisation and delivery of the refreshments, and my job was mainly done, I was on children duty. That's what I was doing. Now, these people's home was about 15 minutes away from the place of worship. And when we arrived, we all clambered out of the 2 cars and did what civilised people do. We had tea and biscuits. We swapped stories and told appropriate jokes. So already he's marked down, I think.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
I was on some pretty good form, I have to say, even if I do say so myself. We had all been merrily chatting for about an hour when I found myself starting a story that required input from our youngest daughter, Katie, who was age 7 at the time. She did a perfect imitation of the main character in my story. So I called out to her. But there was no answer. I wandered into the kitchen and she wasn't there. I checked near the TV where a congregation of children gathered. None of them were Katie. They were all taking part in some kind of car racing video game, and it was therefore at around this time that I realised I had actually, and for real, forgotten my daughter. Forgotten her as in left her behind. Now, I've heard that this happens sometimes, but knew it would never happen to me. What kind of dad leaves a daughter behind? Well, a father all wrapped up in otherworldly things. That's the answer. I think, as I look back, I might have started to panic. I was about to drop the tray of drinks I was holding and run, screaming from the house to look for her when the doorbell went. Heart racing, I ran for the door. First, I saw a policeman. Eek! Then I saw Katie. Phew. I have to say, though, she was looking grumpier than perhaps any child had ever looked before. To be honest, the police constable also looked grumpier than perhaps any police constable had ever looked before. I stepped out onto the front step, closing the door behind me so that no one else could see what was going to go on. The PC explained how he had found this girl in tears outside a nearby hall and had eventually, he stressed the words quite forcefully, eventually been able to locate the house where she was supposed to be enjoying tea and cake with all her family. I did my very best sheepish and religious face, whatever that looks like.
I like that. Yes.
Let's everyone try that now, wherever you are. Look sheepish and religious at the same time. That's very, very difficult. Anyway, I suggested to Katie that we should probably keep this between ourselves and not to tell Mum. After all, I said, why worry her when there was no harm done? At the words no harm, I got a very sharp look.
Really?
That was a surprise. So clearly, I'm not going to ask forgiveness from my daughter, as I've apologised to her many times over and at the time. I do, however, beg the forgiveness of the PC who had to look after an abandoned child and wander around in the cold for a considerable period of time. But I did invite him to our next family service, so I think that's okay. Yeah, I'm sure that's more than adequate. And forgiveness, please, from my wife, who we never did tell, but who'll be listening to this story and finding it all eerily familiar. I'm sure most of your listeners have forgotten their kids at certain times.
Yeah, brilliant. And we've all been there.
Well, that's the next line.
Yeah.
Come on, we've all done it.
Yeah.
Yours,
Yeah.
Reverend
Yeah.
Green. Well, I think what we're going to find is a whole bunch of people who have done... I mean, David Cameron,
Yeah,
you
he
remember,
did it. He
famously left his daughter in the pub.
Yep.
You know, it's easy. You've got loads of them. You've got other things to do. Have you got the kids? Yeah, I've got the kids. I'll go... Oh, are they with you? No.
So
she's
have
still
you
on
done
the
it?
beach.
Have you done it?
I don't think so.
Okay, that means you probably have.
No, I don't. No, I
Okay.
genuinely don't.
So have you
think
done it?
No, I haven't actually.
Have you done it, Matt?
Well, I've only got the one to remember, so
Well, that
it'd be
doesn't
pretty
matter.
poor, wouldn't it?
Well, yes, it would. Okay, so Reverend Green, does he get your forgiveness?
I think good on Katie. She's only 7 and she managed to find her way
With the
to
policeman.
this person's house.
With the
But I
policeman.
mean, yeah, good credit to her, knowing that she was supposed to be going to this
Yeah,
place.
yeah.
But I think, poor old thing, she probably was traumatised by that,
she's
having
fine.
to spend the afternoon with a policeman rather than with her family. But I can see how it's done with 4 children. I mean, 4 children. How does anyone have 4? So I think I'm going to
Well-
forgive on those grounds.
Just because it gets confusing.
'Cause it gets
you
confusing.
Get beyond 3, I don't know where they
Exactly.
are.
Exactly.
All line up. Anyway, Brother Matthew,
Well,
what do you think?
yes, I think we're all in Katie's corner on this one, being that she is only 7 and being able to find out that you're going to a certain house when you don't know where everyone else is going. That's showing quite a lot of resources on her part. And I love the idea that it's, come on, we've all been there. We've all forgotten our kids at some point. Well done. Man of the cloth. Excellent stuff. I am definitely going to forgive just for that line at the end.
What,
Yeah.
Come on, we've all done it.
Come on, we've all done it. Pretty familiar set of circumstances for all of us, I would have thought.
My hunch is on the people's verdict. We will have people saying, yeah, I left the kids down in the
Definitely.
supermarket because I thought my other half had them, and that's just the way it goes. This is Radio 2. We're at the O2. It's 11 minutes to 6 o'clock. We're here for the first night of Monty Python Live. It's confession time, and we're going to try and do a live confession for you. Delighted to welcome the 7th member of the Pythons, as she's often referred to, Carol Cleveland. Hello and welcome to our tiny little studio, which is a dressing room right next door to your little studio. I hope we haven't been too distracting.
Oh, you've been very noisy indeed.
I'm very, very sorry. I was just reading the some of the earlier stuff that you were... Because you've been in all the Python shows, you've been in all the Python movies, you're in the show tonight.
Yes.
And the original brief, is it right? The original brief said that what they wanted was a buxom woman in the full bloom of ladiness or something. Was that
Of
right?
life. Yes, I believe that was the description for the very first sketch that I was in, yes.
Right. And that
And
was
they
your...
got me instead.
That was your role. That was your role all the way through.
Well, not quite, but...
Pom Pom's Up is Carol's book. It's got all the stories in there. Anyway, and I think you've picked a particular story for a confession tonight. So a live Monty Python O2 confession here with Carol. Take it away, Carol.
Dear Father Simon,
Yes, Carol.
I beg forgiveness for a little white lie, well, maybe not so white, that I told many years ago. I know that I am not the only actor to have bended the truth in order to get a job. I'm sure we've all done it at some stage in our careers. Sometimes it's quite necessary. In fact, even my own dear mother, in her early days as a stand-in of various film stars, she told a whopper when she was offered work on the film Man in Grey. She would be required to ride a horse, side saddle, up a hill, and then canter back down again. Well, Mummy didn't like horses very much, and she'd never ridden one. But as this was a quite lucrative job, she told them, of course, that she had. She had a couple of weeks to go, so she took a few riding lessons and then just hoped for the best. She managed to get up and she managed to get down the hill without falling off, but she said it was quite terrifying and she never went near a horse again.
I can imagine.
Well, my story is not dissimilar, but mine involves a car rather than a horse. Back in the 60s, an actor would be introduced on television when playing their first lead role. And I was introduced for my role in an episode of a light-hearted comedy drama series entitled The Sentimental Agent, starring Argentinian heartthrob Carlos Thompson. Now, Carlos typically played European womanizers in early Hollywood films. He was debonair, dashingly handsome, and oozing with charm, and I couldn't have wished for a nicer co-star. Well, at the casting, I was told that I would be required to be in several driving scenes in a sports car of some sort, and I was asked if I could drive and if I had a license. Of course, I said yes to both questions. In truth, I didn't drive, and I had no license. I'd only had a couple of quick lessons on the family automatic car way back when I was 16. But, I felt confident with enough time before filming began to get some lessons. I'd be able to do it. I was sure I would. And I hoped that I could get away with having only a learner's permit. Well, I got the call sheet for the first day's location filming and was a little stunned to see that the first shot of the day was of Carlos and I in a car. On arrival, I was shown the little red Corvette I was going to be driving. I looked at it and bravely said, "Oh, what a lovely car." The scene involved Carlos and I coming out of a stately home, jumping into the car, a few lines of dialogue, and then I swiftly drive us off and out down the driveway.
Yeah.
Well, we started with a close-up, just for the dialogue, which went very well, so that was fine. Then came the long shot with us driving off. We did several takes where I only managed to jerk forward a few feet. I think I sort of managed to convince the director that it was just a matter of getting used to the car. But I think Carlos became a little bit worried at this point because he asked the director if he might take a little break while his stand-in took his place in the car. Well, it was a very long driveway with bushes down either side that provided a little shade for the cast and the crew because it was a very hot day. And Carlos took his chair and he joined them there. Well, I felt rather embarrassed, and I was more determined now than ever to get it right. "Take 5, shouts the clapper boy. "Action," shouts the director, and I leap into the driving seat, slam into first gear, put my foot down, and zoom off so fast that I've got very little space to turn the car towards the gate, and I'm heading straight for Carlos.
Not Carlos.
Yes. I managed to turn the wheels just as I reached him, but not before I saw the look of fear on his face as he flies backwards into the bushes. Well, I stopped the car, and with great trepidation, I look back over my shoulder. Carlos is on the ground, and everyone is rushing up to him.
You've run your co-star over.
Well, that's what I think, yes. And I'm sitting there absolutely frozen to the spot, thinking, "Oh, my God, Carol, what have you done? This is my first big role on TV, and I've killed my leading man." Well, I look again, and Carlos is up on his feet. Whew, thank God. Shaking, I ran over to him, fully expecting him to be covered in blood. Well, as it turned out, the only damage done was to his fedora, his beloved fedora, as he threw himself backwards to avoid being hit. And now the dear man stood there laughing, which I couldn't believe. Well, I got away with my little white lie, but I have to tell you that when it came to doing the next driving scene a few days later, where I had to stop very quickly a foot away from a policeman, it was decided to push the car into shot rather than me driving it.
I can imagine.
So Carlos forgave me, and I do hope that you will too. I do, by the way, now drive an automatic.
Well, that's probably, but there was a lie at the heart of this, Carol Cleveland.
Yes.
That's the thing. Okay, so let's see if we're going to get any forgiveness. I suppose, Sister Rebecca, kind of, if Carlos did some forgiveness and he was the guy who'd been run over in the first place, Anyway, you might take a sterner line on this. What do you think?
I think it was Carlos's fault, Carol, for being such a ninny that he didn't want to stay in the car with you while you were driving.
Absolutely.
And secondly,
Good point.
I think
No
he
trust.
should have just said, "I'll drive," in a manly way, in
Yeah.
the manner of a heartthrob from Argentina. So I think that just getting out of the car was very cowardly of him, and you didn't hurt him. You just hurt his
No,
floppy hat.
just his hat.
So
What kind of
I
person wears a
think,
floppy hat
well,
anyway?
exactly, those actor types. I think you're completely forgiven. I mean, anyone would have done the same to get a lovely job like that.
Well, thank you.
Matt, what do you say?
Yeah, Carlos should have got out of the way, really, shouldn't he?
Yes.
Yeah. What are you doing standing in the way of the car? Get out of the way of the car, Carlos, with your floppy hat. And also, what's the director doing, forcing you to drive, although it is a very nice car? And so you got to drive a very nice car as well. So I'm going to blame the director and Carlos, the swoonsome actor, and not you, Carol.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. And
Carol,
thank you for
consider yourself forgiven. Well, it's 16 minutes to 6 o'clock. This is BBC Radio 2 with a Drive Time Confession, back to Bacchanalian debauchery. That's where this is going to be. Look at that. Novice Nigel's in because we're cooking up with some Thursday food. Hello, Nigel.
Yeah, Bacchanalian. I rather like that.
Yes, very good. Well, you brought in some wine and
His
we're doing
bank statement. For some
a
reason.
bank statement.
My piece of paper I'm writing on.
Okay.
A churlish bank. Why has he got so many
Go on, open
figures?
it up, Matt. I bet it's good. Let's see what he's got in there. Anyway, here's tonight's tale. And it comes from... Give us a...
No rush. Anyone? Bernice.
No, wrong sex.
Bernard.
Okay, Bernie. There you go. Bernie. Bernie says, "My dear Father Simon and whoever is there this week, you had a confession last week about a Reading festival goer losing his sunglasses down the toilet. My wife and I chortled on our journey home after a busy day coffee making and sandwich slicing as our own festival memories came flooding back. My festival confession involves an incident from the very same festival, but the year slightly different, 1988, also with my brother, but no toilets this time, you'll be reassured. It was a vintage year for the festival, with Bonnie Tyler and Meatloaf both bottled off stage.
Oh, there's a phrase. Already this is going well.
Bottled off stage.
That used to happen quite a lot.
Oh, yeah, all the time. Yeah.
Anyway, I was sharing a small tent with my little brother Colin. It was a fairly generic two-man affair, blue with firm poles and taut guy ropes. I battled...
What?
Good old Colin. He's got taut
It was a
guy
blue,
ropes.
blue tent, firm poles and taut guy ropes. I battled with it myself as Colin said he was too tired after his exams to help me put it up. This is classic Colin, annoying and lazy, and in my tent. Now, Colin and I get on fine normally, but when we're in close proximity for a considerable period of time, we end up shouting at each other. And in the case of one summer holiday in Weston-super-Mare, we rolled around a campsite exchanging blows over whose turn it was to shower first. 30 years on, it doesn't matter, but it was definitely my turn. Anyway, so he's clearly moved on and got over it. So anyway, back to Reading. Once the tent was up, we were ready to go and excited about seeing the Wonder Stuff and Choir Boys and, if we had to, Deacon Blue. Sorry, Ricky.
Yeah.
Anyway, my transgression occurred on the last day of the festival, by which time I have to say I was suffering from festival fog after enjoying 2 days of bands and dancing and drinking. You know how it goes. I was having a great time with a bunch of guys from Glasgow who were brash, noisy, and much more fun than my little brother Colin. They were my gang for the day, and they didn't seem to mind me tagging along. I was wearing my Wonder Stuff t-shirt, and that seemed to be enough for them. Colin was nowhere to be seen. I had no idea where he was, and frankly, I didn't care very much either. Now, as you know, it's thirsty work, this festival business, and the more music we listened to, the more thirsty we became. I don't know why this is. Anyway, by the time we decided to retire to our tents, we'd fully quenched our thirst. Okay. The Glasgow boys had left to find their tent, and I was all on my own. Still no sign of Colin. Now, Colin's main use at times like this is his sense of direction, and I can normally follow him home. I wasn't too worried. All I needed to do was to find a blue tent with poles and guy ropes. How difficult could it be?
And how taut were they? Sorry. Move on. Beg pardon.
Thanks. Now, this took much longer than I was expecting. Everything seemed to be arranged to confuse me. Funny that. I spent hours negotiating guy ropes which seemed to be positioned to trip me up. Eventually, I found the tent. I decided not to change into my nightwear, and I decided just to strip down into my pants and slip into my sleeping bag. Colin was snoring away as usual, so didn't notice me rummaging around the tent, trying to find my clothes and backpack. None of which appeared to be where I'd left them.
I can't imagine where this is going.
Which is normally a
Cannot
phrase
imagine.
always associated with being in
Or
the wrong
Bernie, for
place.
that matter. Where's he going?
I'm not sure how long I'd been asleep, but I do remember me being woken up. There was a lot of shouting and yelling and screaming. Someone appeared to be trying to pull my sleeping bag out of the tent. I looked up with blurry eyes to see not Colin, but someone who I can tell you most definitely was a woman. And she appeared to be less than pleased to see me. The guy shouting at me wasn't very happy either. Apparently, this blue tent with firm poles and taut guy ropes was his tent. I was in my pants in his sleeping bag and cozying up to his girlfriend. He encouraged me to leave very quickly. Most of my clothes were thrown out of the tent, but not my Wonder Stuff T-shirt. I suppose it could have been worse, but by the time I really did find Colin, it was time to get up. So I ended up very tired, as you can imagine. So, Father Simon, I need forgiveness from the irate man and the irate lady who I accidentally visited in the middle of the night at the Reading Festival in 1988. I didn't mean to intrude. I blame the Wonder Stuff and the boys from Glasgow for leading me down a bad rock and roll path. Please forgive me. Well, we kind of knew where he was going, even though he didn't know where he was going, but we kind of guessed where he was going to end up. In someone else's blue tent. Who would have thought it?
Ah, the tales of tents at festivals. You can't beat them, can you?
I
I've heard
reckon
some terrible tales.
Have
from,
you?
Yes, I have.
From who?
From people that I know. Things
Like
like
what? What sort of-
I'm not going to go
what
into
sort
that
of
now.
thing?
As opposed to
Kind
people you
of-
don't know.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Honestly,
anyway,
dear, I ended up in the wrong
this
tent.
kind of thing happened a lot, but it wouldn't happen now because you can get an app, a Find Your Tent app at festivals, which I'm sure is very
Yeah,
useful.
but you can't get any signal.
That's very true, actually. Anyway, I think it must have happened all the time, and it still probably happens a lot, and worse things have happened in festival tents, so I'm going to forgive you.
Worst things have happened. There's an awful lot of knowledge going on here with the answers. So, yes, Novice Nigel.
I think taut guy ropes, all this sense of direction, I can fully understand all of that. And his homing tracking device wasn't good because he hadn't got his brother. And the reason he hadn't got his brother, because he was exhibiting irresponsible big brother syndrome, which I have suffered from many occasions, being the youngest of three. So I know what that feels like, to be abandoned by your big brothers who really don't care because they're getting offered their new Glaswegian mates. So I'm definitely
Calm
not
down,
forgiving
Nigel,
you.
you're
But,
getting
well,
on.
it's just all coming back now. Some horrible flashbacks from similar festivals and things like that. And I didn't have an app in those days, and I didn't.
Is the
find my
BBC
brothers.
counsellor still on?
It's all right, all right. So Bernie, on this occasion now, I'm not forgiving you at all.
Okay, what do you say?
Well, I mean, he was in the sleeping bag after all, so I think
And
that's
wearing pants.
Yes, so it's all above board. But I am not going to forgive, and that's really because I've got a bit of a prejudice against the Wonder Stuff. I really didn't like them at all. Size of a cow, not really my thing. So you lost the T-shirt, probably a good thing. Good thing you lost that. Yes, I am not going to forgive because of the Wonder Stuff.
Now it's 20 minutes to 6. This is BBC Radio 2, and we have another confession for you. But it was a confession that came in quite a long time ago, and I've been waiting for an opportunity to read it out because it's a very unusual story. And then we were presented with an opportunity to speak to Michael Morpurgo, who's in to talk about a new book. Hello, Michael.
Hello, nice to see you, sir.
Very nice for you to come back on the show. And the book that you're talking about is Only Remembered, Powerful Words and Pictures About the War That Changed Our World. And we're going to be talking about that a lot after 6 o'clock. But when this story came in, and it is a confession, and it's written to me as dear Father Simon, I was thinking, I don't know what we should do with this story. I want to read it out, but we need to wait for the right moment. And I said to Matt and Rebecca, do you want to know about this story before I read it out? Because I think it's quite a powerful story.
And we don't.
And you both said you didn't want to hear it. Yeah. So no one has actually heard this story. It feels as though it could be included in your book, Michael, which is why we've asked you to come in and join the panel. So this story comes from a gentleman called Sanjean. Dear Father Simon and the Confessional Courier, my story takes place over 30 years ago when I left the home counties to attend university in the glamorous city of Hull. Apart from the culture shock, my friends joked that maps simply indicated that the lands above Birmingham, there be dragons. Life as an undergraduate in this fine city proved very enjoyable indeed. Now, in case my children hear this confession, let me say that I spent my time as a new undergraduate diligently attending all my lectures and tutorials, studying hard in the library, abstaining from alcohol and ensuring that I was in bed at a respectable hour every night. Well, not much of that is true, but these were the heady days of student grants, cheap beer and plenty of joyful entertainment. Now, lots of confessions have started in this manner, but very few continue like this. Now, being a well-brought-up young man, I noticed that across the road from my halls of residence, there was a hospice looking after the elderly. Feeling a little ashamed of my several weeks of bacchanalian debauchery. First time that phrase has ever made it into a confession,
Really?
by the way. Yes.
Wow.
I went over and offered my voluntary services to help in any way that I could, that any way would be of use to the nurses there. Appreciative of the offer, I subsequently found myself every Tuesday evening pushing a tea trolley around the common room and serving tea to the folks there. They were a lovely bunch, but generally at a fairly advanced stage of dementia, which meant we had some unusual conversations. Being of Indian origin, occasionally I would elicit memories of their time spent in the subcontinent during colonial bygone days. Other times I would be mistaken for their doctor, and occasionally I would understand what made so-called comedy shows of that era, such as Mind Your Language, so popular. Overall, though, I began to enjoy these weekly visits, tempered by the realisation that the folks there were not there for long. Now, after a few weeks, on one cold Tuesday, December evening, I noticed a new guest. She was an elderly lady, body hunched from arthritis, who caught my eye as I entered the common room. What held my eye was her expression, which went from uninterested to puzzled, to recognition, to tearful joy. Getting up from her chair, her back straightened, and she approached me and took my hands. "It's you," she whispered. "You came back. You promised you'd come back." Now, being just 18, I was momentarily nonplussed and simply nodded. She then smiled and said, "Shall we dance?" Again, not knowing quite what to do, I nodded again. She then began to hum Johann Strauss's The Blue Danube, and we proceeded to waltz around the room. Her back was perfectly straight, and she was looking at me with tears in her eyes, and she kept on repeating, "I knew you'd come back." Then, with a look of mock disapproval, she added, "But you have forgotten how to waltz properly." And finally, I led her back to her chair and said I had to go. "But you will come back, won't you?" she asked, and I promised that I would. Over the following weeks, every Tuesday evening, the same pattern repeated itself. Her look of puzzlement, replaced by joy, our waltz around the room, and finally a promise that I would return. The two things which did alter were firstly that I learnt her name was Jill, and secondly, courtesy of the Hull University Ballroom Dancing Society, I was very patiently taught how to dance the waltz, so at least I would be eventually spared that criticism. Christmas came and I headed back home for several weeks of much-deserved rest and a lot of reading catch-up to complete. On returning in the new year, that Tuesday, I went across the dark, rainy street to resume my weekly tea-serving duties. As I entered, one of the nurses called me over. "I'm so sorry," she said, "but Jill passed away over Christmas, but her daughter has asked me to give you this letter." Later that evening, I sat down to see what the letter said. And this is it. "Dear Sanjean, the nurses have told me how you dance with my mother every week, and if I may, I would like to offer you an explanation as to these curious events. During the First World War, my mother was a nurse in London, far from home. Feeling lonely, she began to attend a weekly tea dance, where she met a charming Indian soldier. He, too, was lonely and far from home. Before long, a friendship blossomed. Every week they would meet, drink tea, dance the waltz, and talk and talk and talk. Before long, they began to fall in love, but before this love could take any substantive form, the soldier was posted overseas to a front line somewhere. Their last meeting in the tea room was incredibly sad, but he promised that he absolutely would return. Now, the truth is, of course, he never did return from the war, and broken-hearted, my mother eventually met someone else, settled down, had a family, and a long and happy life. Anyway, I just wanted to thank you for being so kind and giving Jill such joy in her final weeks. I wish you well." And that's the end of the letter that Sanjean got. So Sanjean finishes his email to me like this. "So, Father Mayo, I'm not really sure what I seek absolution for. Is it the sadness of a broken heart? I don't know. Now, maybe if I may, on this occasion, I would like to break with tradition, and rather than seek forgiveness, I would like to ask for your collective blessing. Not for me personally, but indeed all acts of random kindness. For as Iris Murdoch wrote in The Bell, our actions are like ships which we may watch set out to sea and not know when or with what cargo they will return to port, in memory of Jill and her waltzing partner." And that's from Sanjean. And I think you'll agree that's a pretty extraordinary story. And Sanjean wanted it read as a confession. We've spoken to Sanjean. We're going to have him on the show tomorrow because it sounded like a whole movie there in just one brief-ish confession. So I guess you can just say whatever you like at this point. Michael Morpurgo, we asked you to come in because your book is full of stories like this. What do you think of that?
Well, my first reaction is I don't know why I bother to write fiction, because that was just such an extraordinary story, you couldn't have invented it. I have written several stories which are about memories, fading memories. I wrote one called The Best Christmas Present in the World, which is about a lady with dementia thinking that someone was someone else, but it wasn't nearly as powerful as that. What's wonderful about this, it has the power of truth. That's what's extraordinary about it. And it was beautifully told, too.
That's what I thought. Rebecca, what did you think of that story from Sanjean?
I think it definitely could have come from one of your books, Michael. It's a very touching and powerful story. I think the juxtaposition between the modern... Well, at that time, he was an 18-year-old, and her. She was at the other end of her life. And the fact that it had a physical effect on her back straightening up and everything.
Quite extraordinary.
Yeah. Very sweet as well that he went to learn to dance and learn to do the waltz in order to be able to dance with her properly. So, yeah, definitely gets my blessing for many reasons. But, yeah, wonderful story.
Sanjean sounds like one heck of a guy, Matt.
He does. Wow, that's had a profound impact on me, I think. Yeah. No, I'm really lost for words. If we were going to be forgiving, I'm not sure I'd be forgiving him for the impact it's had on me. It's absolutely wow.
Well, I think you're speaking for a lot of people, and there are many stories like that in Michael's book, which we'll talk about the other side of the news. But if you were ever going to do a volume 2, I would submit that Sanjean's story
should be in there. Just a pity I didn't come in about why didn't you invite me in 6 months or a year ago?
Well, they were this week's confessions. An extraordinary tale at the end, I'm sure you'll agree. Let us know your own secret, please, perhaps inspired by one of those. Here's the email. It's confessions@bbc.co.uk. More in a week. And if you missed our backstage Monty Python shenanigans, just download the Weekly Mayo podcast, because everything is there. Thank you.